Welcome to an hour of HealthMade Radio. HealthMade is a community for natural health seekers who educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. Our core concept belief is in the innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. HealthMade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I'll be your host. Today's guest is Doug Traubel. Doug Traubel is a 32-year veteran peace officer with a master's certification from Idaho Peace Officer Standards and Training. Doug's career began in Chula Vista, California, 7 miles from the U.S.-Mexico border. His assignments included patrol officer, field training officer, SWAT team, and street team, a protective patrol unit that targeted gangs and series-related crimes like robbery and other special enforcement projects. Doug graduated from the San Diego County Sheriff's Academy in 1986 and from San Diego State University with a bachelor in political science, emphasis on constitutional law, and a minor in Spanish language. In 1993, Doug was awarded the Medal of Valor for his response to 3 hostile armed men he and his partner confronted while on plainclothes foot patrol in the alley of a high-crime apartment complex. Disgusted with the infiltration of Marxist philosophy in the California criminal justice system and its near-paralyzing effect on police work, Doug moved to Ada County, Idaho in 1994. Doug became an Ada County deputy sheriff. In 1998, he was awarded the Field Services Director's Award for his work with troubled youth. He introduced and developed the first Ada County Sheriff Gang Unit. In 2003, Doug transferred to the Ada County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, where he served for 14 years as a criminal investigator and firearms instructor. Doug has been instructor at the Idaho State Police Academy on the topics of gangs, and an adjunct faculty member at Boise State University, where taught an upper division class titled Gangs, Drugs, and Violence. He's the author of 2 books, Can They Do That? How Police Get Around the Fourth Amendment, and Red Badge, a veteran peace officer's commentary on the Marxist subversion of American law enforcement and culture. Doug, that you've done a lot.
It's been a long journey, that's for sure. A lot of growth, a lot of rewards, and a lot of pain.
So I'm really curious. I mean, as a police officer, and I mean dealing with patrolling the border and dealing with a lot of gang violence, and why writing books? I mean, what got you into the desire to write books and not just kind of be more of an active member in the police force?
Well, really it came down to trying to find the reason behind so many things that happened to me throughout my career and even before my career in college. And by that I mean I found myself being punished for who I am, a white male, and my beliefs, which are just traditional beliefs. For example, in college, being punished if I took a politically incorrect point of view, and punished for my grades. In my career, being passed over for promotion by the president of the Latino Police Officers Association, which is a racially exclusive, self-serving organization. Many agencies have these different peace officer associations within the agency, and they become kind of like mafia groups that defend their own, and there's no representation for someone like me. And I'm thinking, why is merit not being looked at? And instead, we're looking at the superficial things, race, sex. And so I started digging, what's causing this division? What's causing the illogic of decisions made by administrators to promote? And not only that, when I would see someone deserving of promotion, let's say that is, Hispanic, because I work down by the Mexican border, and they deserved it, then the public sometimes would question, is that person deserving of the promotion, or were they a product of what I was trying to find out what was going on, this Marxist influence in law enforcement? And so anyway, throughout my college and law enforcement career, I dug and dug and dug, and I discovered, well, this is all Marxist influence. This is all designed to divide and and conquer, literally. And so I just started writing, and eventually I assembled these various essays together, and I thought I should share this, and so that became Red Badge. And the second book, Can They Do That? I just simply want the public to be informed, because the police are the servants, and the public are who we serve. And I believe an informed citizenry is necessary to avoid a police state. And ignorance is something that government, of course, capitalizes on. And the public school system is never going to give you the education it needs, that you need to restore the republic. So I thought it'd be wise and responsible to share search and seizure laws with the citizens. So that's the genesis of the two books. One, just digging to find out, why am I being punished for doing the right thing and just because of what I look like? And two, I see this public school system and in the universities as well, advancing the same Marxist philosophy and not educating people what they need to know to be a responsible citizen and avoid a police state.
So, and you bring some fascinating points, because we're looking at, we establish a police force, or we have a police force that's there to serve and protect us, the citizens, and that is our beliefs. But it's almost like, from when I'm reading your book, that the police force is becoming more and more than to protect the interest of the government, rather than to protect the sovereign individual in their rights and their ability to the pursuit of happiness and to develop as an individual. That's kind of the feeling that I get when I'm reading your book.
That's exactly right, and of course the book was written before COVID, but that's the example that everyone should be able to see this through now. Churches closed, businesses deemed essential or non-essential, people denied access, to court. I mean, the state constitution, Article 1, Section 18, guarantees open access to the courts without prejudice. Well, here in Ada County during COVID, people were arrested for failure to appear when they're standing at the door to the courthouse for the appointed, date and time for their court event, and then they won't wear a mask. So then they're arrested and dragged through the very door that they were denied access. It's absurd, number one, and it's a violation of the oath of office to even make that arrest. A judge's edict cannot supersede a constitutionally protected right. And so during COVID, like I said, churches closed, that sort of thing. These are all unconstitutional. And if the oath is to matter, then the leaders within these law enforcement organizations should put their oath in action and challenge this overreach. And that hasn't happened in the state of Idaho or throughout the rest of the country, so far as I can see. And my worry is this conditions the public to believe that anything a governor or president says goes. Well, my oath is to the Constitution, not to a governor, not to the president. And so if something is clearly unconstitutional, I'll give you a hypothetical. If in Idaho there were to be gun seizures, that's a violation of Article 1, Section 11 of the state constitution. So if the legislature passes a law and says a certain kind of gun is not legal, well, that is I have to reconcile that against the state constitution. And so I'm going to not enforce that law because I'm going to honor my oath. And so you're correct in what you're getting from my book. What's more helpful to the audience is to look now in current events with COVID, and it certainly should make everyone worry that policing agencies have a leadership backing that is not oath-centered. And you mentioned the sovereignty of the individual. The purpose of government is to secure God-given rights. And that oath that I took, I intend to put in action as sheriff to secure those God-given rights. I'm not just going to enforce any law you put in front of me. It has to conform with the Constitution of the United States and the state constitution of Idaho.
So can you just kind of reiterate kind of what is an oath of office? I mean, because every individual, when they step into their role, the governmental role, they are then taking an oath of office. So what does that oath of office entail, and how is that not being followed?
Well, the Constitution for the United States of America, Article 6, requires that all federal and state executive, judicial, and legislative officers take an oath to support the Constitution for the United States of America. So that's why we take an oath. Now, what is an oath? It's a solemn promise. And I liken it to wedding vows. It's taken before witnesses, and those witnesses expect you to honor it. The constitutions, respective constitutions of the state of the United States and the state of Idaho and the other states mean nothing if the oath doesn't mean everything. And when sheriffs in particular, and that's a very unique office, when sheriffs in particular do not put their oath in action, it renders the Constitution toothless and government is unrestrained. You see, the Constitution is a limiting document. It's supposed to limit. It's like the U.S. Constitution is like the employee handbook for the federal government, and similarly, the state constitution for the state government. And so that is what an oath is. It's a solemn promise. But if you don't put your oath in action, then the Constitution means nothing, and the people are left unprotected.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Doug Traubel. He's the author of Red Badge, a Veterans Peace Officers Commentary on the Marxist Subversion of American Law Enforcement and Culture. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Doug Traubel. He is the author of Red Badge, a veteran peace officer commentary on the Marxist subversion of American law enforcement and culture. So when an individual's taking that oath, and especially with your experience being in law enforcement, so I'm curious then. What goes through the mind of police officers? I mean, what gets them to the point where they're acting in a fashion that is obviously completely contrary to the oath that they took?
Well, every agency has a culture, and it really comes down to a leadership vacuum. The officers aren't thinking; they're acting. In fact, in academies, the Constitution isn't even a subject. So you learn search and seizure law, and you learn all the other things you need, the nuts and bolts that you need to do the job on the street. But the Constitution and the oath, there's no time spent on that, and so therefore they don't know what they don't know, and so they believe that they just need to follow orders. Well, that's precisely the opposite of following your oath. And so really there really isn't much thought. And these are human beings too. They have car payments, spouses, house payments. And so they're worried about being fired for not following orders. And so part of this is human nature, part of this is ignorance, and all of it can be fixed with oath-centered leadership. And that's why it is essential, particularly for sheriff's offices, to have as their sheriff an oath-centered leader, an oath-centered sheriff. And then in the training program in the various agencies, a culture can be built where that officer in the field now has a conscious, the oath is alive in their head, basically, let's put it that way, means something. And now when it doesn't feel right, they can ask themselves, well, am I going against my oath here? Should I be arresting this person at the steps of the courthouse for failure to appear when they won't wear a mask because a judge inside made this edict? Or this doesn't feel right, and this is a violation of the Constitution. I'm going to call the sheriff and say, Sheriff, am I on track here? Am I about to do something wrong? And that's how you fix it. So that's why ignorance is lack of knowledge, and how you fix it is making the oath center to policy and policing decisions. So that now we have a culture that's oath-centered, and that leaves the public more protected.
And what is the difference? We're talking about like the sheriff, and then also we're talking about a police department. Are they one and the same, or do they function differently and independently?
They're very different. Most citizens don't know or understand or the difference, because if you get pulled over and you're getting a ticket, they just see a badge and a pen, and then you got to get to work, and but there's a substantive difference. Frankly, the biggest difference is that the sheriff is the only elected law enforcement officer in the country. So his oath is to the Constitution, not the county commissioners, not a judge, not the governor or president. His boss is the people. The chiefs of police are appointed, and so they don't have the relative autonomy that a sheriff does. They do take an oath, but they, for example, I think it was Baltimore where rioting was going on, and the mayor, I believe, told the chief of police to, quote, give them more room, meaning the rioters, give them more room. So if you're an appointed chief, and that's the order you get from the mayor, who can fire you, you give them more room. A sheriff has jurisdiction throughout the entire county. City limits apply to the city. The only exception to that for a sheriff is if it's a military base or some other exclusive area of control by the federal government, or in Idaho, one exception is the state capitol itself, the building itself. But other than that, the sheriff has jurisdiction, and so you don't want to be arrogant with your power. But in times of crisis, the sheriff needs to know his authority, the span of his authority, and that way, he can step in when the difficult things need to be said and done. That relative autonomy helps protect life and property and our rights.
Yeah, because with these last couple of years, we've really come to understand the importance. One of the things here in my show, obviously I talk about integrative health, subjects, but, health freedom is such a crucial aspect. And with that, it becomes then our the rights that we have that's protected through the Constitution, our God-given rights. And so in regards then to, the kind of overreach of police power, and recognizing then that, maybe we aren't as protected by the police as we thought we were, and also that maybe they don't operate on the behalf of the people. It is more kind of a governmental agency, and then also recognizing that there is another part of the executive branch, which is then the sheriff's office, which then should then be more of the people, should be, like I said, it's an elected office. And with that, it should be something that should be beholden to the public, because the public then elected that individual. So how should, in a situation where there's, let's say, federal overreach and the sheriff is recognizing that, how can a sheriff then balance the power to protect the citizens?
Well, through interposition, and I know you're talking about the medical side of things, and we can stay there, but just to make something maybe a little more, some topics people can envision in their mind, gun seizures. So say the ATF, a federal agency, right, comes into Boise because the federal law changed to where you can't own an AR. And they go to a local city agency with a list of addresses, and the local city agency is going to power up with the ATF and go door to door and seize these weapons. The sheriff, standing on the state constitution, as I said earlier, Article 1, Section 11, forbidding confiscations and registration of guns, should interpose, meaning physically stand between that overreach of the ATF and whatever agency has powered up with them and the people. The oath needs to be put in action. That's an example of that. At a local level, if masks are being forced to be worn, this is now going back into the medical choice topic here. As sheriff, I would make it known that I will not process any prisoner that you arrest for not wearing a mask. Don't bring them to my jail. Cite and release them. I'm not going to make the illegitimate legitimate and put the citizens through the humiliating process of being booked in a jail for a health choice. If you go back to the very beginning, our rights come from God. Okay, so the purpose of government is to secure God-given rights. That's the purpose of government, right? So we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, life, part of life, the right to life, is to breathe freely, and it stands to reason, the right to defend your life. But these things don't even need written down. These are self-evident, pre-existing natural law rights. And so what I'm trying to describe is continuity from our founding ethos throughout the development of our country to today, where we have this devolution now of rights and overreach, and someone needs to interpose. And the best person for that is the sheriff, at least to initially demonstrate it. And my hope is that it catches on to everyone who takes an oath. That's what has to happen. In order to restore the proper balance of power and the purpose of government, we have an inversion right now of the power and purpose of government. It is not existing to secure God-given rights. It is existing to control the people for its own benefit. And so the sheriff does have unique authority and relative autonomy to demonstrate interposition and to certainly run interference between overreach and the individual. And keep in mind, Doctor, the individual is the true minority. And think of the English language. The word I is always capital, no matter where it is in a sentence or paragraph. And I find that quite interesting because that is the true minority. We're in a culture now where you hear about group rights and special rights and extra rights. Well, what's lost in that is the individual. And that is who should be, in my mind, as an oath keeper. I am protecting the individual. I don't care if it's man, woman, or what color you are. The individual's God-given rights. That is what I'm charged to defend by oath, and that's what interposition does.
And that's the interesting point that you're making, is that the I, me as an individual, is truly the minority. It is one individual. Let's say, it's a sovereign individual, but it's one individual. So, whether you're black, white, Hispanic, homosexual, heterosexual, or, whatever direction that you have, Christian, Muslim, or whatever it is, each individual, no matter all of that, is the true minority, and that true minority, the I, should always be protected.
Absolutely, and that's why I think it's such a beautiful thing to really think about, just in your mind, just that word I, one letter always capitalized, and really the Bill of Rights are the untouchables, and that should be a nonpartisan issue, and I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on, your sexual orientation or anything else. We all benefit when we all defend the rights of the individual. It's very dangerous to get into group rights, and that's where social justice starts to undermine criminal justice, and that's how the advancement of Marxism is pushed. They gain traction by dividing and vilifying, and it's a very emotional appeal because they decide who the victim and who the villain is in the narrative. And so those are the kind of things in my book I talk about, and I also in my speeches as I run for office I talk about as well, because I reject the premise of Marxism, and I reject its various tactics and its strategy, because who suffers? The individual.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's take a quick break. You're listening to Help Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Doug Traubel. He is the author of Red Badge, a veteran peace officer's commentary on the Marxist subversion of American law enforcement and culture. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Help Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Doug Traubel. He's the author of Red Badge, a veteran peace officer commentary on the Marxist subversion of American law enforcement and culture. So when then a sheriff is drawing that line, here you have a huge police force, you have federal officers that comes after you. We're talking about gun seizures, and they're coming, doing door to door. How can a sheriff's office? That seems like when you think of sheriff, you think of a couple of guys and maybe that's it. You don't look upon this huge group of people. How can they defend at that? If you look at the odds.
Well, you're correct. The office itself, there's about 740 employees, and most of those are not on the street. Most of them are in the jail, or they're non-sworn. So what's interesting is, in state statute, the sheriff is given the authority to command as many inhabitants of the county as necessary to fulfill his duties. And this is consistent with what's called Peelian Principle number 7. By that I'm referring to principles by Robert Peel, who is credited with being the founder of the first full-time metropolitan police force in London. The Brits were suspicious of his proposal to have a full-time police force, and so he came up with 10 principles to set aside their worry that it was going to turn into a Praetorian Guard like in ancient Rome, an internal security force. See, the Brits knew their history, and so when this proposal came to them, they were worried. Well, Peelian Principle number 7, in essence, says that the police are not to replace the citizen in their duty for law and order, but to supplement it. And so, interesting, you look at state code, Idaho code, that gives the sheriff the authority to command as many inhabitants, and so a sheriff can do that. So while he has a limited number of deputies, the Ada County has over 500,000 people in it, and so he can call the public to assist them, and that is a healthy relationship to have, and where it's not the sheriff versus the citizen, it's just sheriff with the citizen defending our God-given rights, and And as far as the feds coming in, keep in mind, regulations are not laws. So we can move away from ATF for a second and talk about some federal bureaucrat, armed bureaucrat coming on your farm because you're selling raw goat milk to your neighbors and they want to cite you. Regulations are not laws because the Constitution is clear. Congress has all power to pass law. And so regulations, penned by some bureaucrat are not law. And so sheriffs can step in there too and interpose and arrest for trespass these federal agents, these armed bureaucrats.
And that's so in essence, you can then create so that every citizen then becomes part of the sheriff's department, and that's where we believe then that the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, is so important, so that you can then be part of that force to protect yourself from both foreign and domestic criminals. Yes,
I mean in the extreme, yes, certainly. And my thought on that is to, before I have a need, to recruit, vet, and minimally train people or have them train on their own as a ready reserve force. That maybe I never need them, but if I do, I have a phone tree and they come to a muster location where then from that point forward, once they're given their mission, they have authority and they get behind me and my deputies. So let's say we were downtown Boise as being torn up by protesters, and the mayor tells the chief to give them more room to riot, and I get wind of that. Okay, then I fill my prisoner transport buses up with deputies, and we go to a muster location. We pick up our citizens, and then I'm the first one off the bus. At the tip of the spear is the sheriff. Behind me are my deputies, and behind my deputies are the people. And that is a healthy form of government because it is the government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And so there's no division. There's partnership in the truest way, truest sense of the word. And but you can't just say all come. You should, to be responsible, to have good, moral, and trained people. You need to. You can't at the snap of the finger create the need to create the force when you need it. It has to pre-exist. So my thought is to have this relationship with the population before I ever need it, and then when I need it, they show up trained and prepared, and we go into action together. And so it's also responsible fiscally. I mean, I don't want to grow an empire. I want a oath-centered, professional, proactive law enforcement culture in the sheriff's office, and I want to know that I can tap into, lean on, depend on citizens to back me up in protecting our quality of life in our county.
I love it, and this is why it's important for citizens to recognize then the value of the sheriff that they're voting in. What is his mindset? What does he base his decisions on? I mean, what does he lean on? Is he beholden to the public? Is he beholden to the government? What is his beliefs? So that's
right.
It's. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. And the same goes for the prosecutor, because if you look at state statute, even though, let me back up. So the sheriff is what's called the CLEO, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the county. Now, that term came from a Supreme Court decision in 1997, Mack Prince versus U.S. It was the sheriff of Graham County, Arizona, Sheriff Richard Mack, sued the federal government along with some other sheriffs over the Brady Bill, which was an unfunded mandate that the sheriffs were told to enforce under the threat of arrest. So he sued the government, went to the Supreme Court, and in the majority opinion, it was stated that the sheriff is the CLEO, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the county. So that was established, or reestablished, I should say, in that case. In the state constitution of Idaho, it requires all 44 counties to have a sheriff. And then in the statute, this is where I'm getting to the prosecutor. By statute, it shows the sheriff and prosecutor in essence as twins. So regardless of jurisdiction, and by statute, Idaho statute, the sheriff and prosecutor, they're mentioned together in the same statute, are the chief law enforcement officers of the county. That's why it's important to have a constitutional prosecutor as well, because the sheriff, of course, is the one with the badge, gun, and handcuffs actually enforcing the law. So if I were to arrest, let's say, an armed bureaucrat who is harassing a citizen for selling raw goat milk and enforcing a regulation, in other words, an armed bureaucrat in a police costume pretending to be law enforcement, and in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson refers to pretended legislation. That's what regulations are, pretended legislation, because the legislature, Congress, didn't pass it. And so if I arrest that person for trespass, I give them the chance to leave first and they don't. What will the prosecutor file? will the prosecutor file on that charge, or does the sheriff have egg on his face? And that's why we need this consistency in ideology. We need to have the oath-centered lens and know the difference between what is a law and what is a regulation and jurisdiction. Law enforcement is a local responsibility, not a federal responsibility. And so as the chief law enforcement officer of the county, when the sheriff interposes and let's say it does get to the point where an arrest is made, will your prosecutor file? And if your prosecutor doesn't, will your attorney general file? Can the sheriff go to the attorney general for backup? This is why this election, May 17th, is so important. And then not only that, 2 years from now, when prosecutors are up for election, we really need the public to understand the importance of vetting and installing people with the knowledge and backbone to make the Constitution mean something.
I love it. And let's take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Doug Traubel. He is the author of Red Badge. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Doug Traubel. He is the author of Red Badge, a veteran peace officer's commentary on the Marxist subversion of American law enforcement and culture. So you mentioned there's a kind of a difference between criminal justice versus social justice. Can you create that distinction, explain that distinction a little bit and how that impacts us?
Yes, well, social justice, I identify it as a strategy used by the left, but it actually exists outside of Marxist. You see social justice, it's a way of regulating, controlling human behavior, and you'll see it in closed societies that could be religious orders, for example, or primitive tribes, and it can be very effective because it's based on very, very subjective rules and mythologies, and there's not a real hard standard of proof on anything. And that can be effective in those closed and primitive societies. But criminal justice, certainly while not perfect, is more objective, and it has harder standards to prove if, for example, you're going to try to convict somebody. So in a primitive society, you could have a tribal leader just by virtue of the status make an accusation. Everyone simply is not going to challenge it. In a criminal justice system, especially ours, where the presumption of innocence is supposed to be there, right? It's very important that is honored, and we don't poison or dilute the standards of criminal justice. But that is happening, and I'll give you one example. If you are called to, there's many examples, but this one related to the medical side of things. If you were called to jury duty, doctor, and you refuse to wear a mask, you're now excluded from serving on a jury. So that how fair is that? A jury of your peers? So now you're the defendant, and everyone that was vetted during the voir dire process, which is the jury selection process, everyone that was vetted is someone that at least isn't going to challenge wearing a mask. And so how do we have free thinkers in that pool of jurors? That is now your freedom is going to be determined by those jurors. So your freedom to exercise a medical choice not to wear a mask now excluded you from sitting in a jury. This is a form of social justice, undermining the system. And there are other examples like hate crimes laws, which are not laws at all. I don't know if you want to go on that path or not, but they can't exist on their own. They have to be piggybacked on an actual crime, because otherwise it's just thought crime. It's a thought crime. It can't exist on its own until somebody actually does something, and the motivation is being prosecuted as much as the actual action. And so what happens is it puts the prosecutors in a position to determine who is more precious than another, who gets more lumps for misbehaving, who gets more protection for being deemed a victim. And so social justice dilutes the more strict and objective standards, and it brings emotion in to the system, and that's very, very dangerous.
And the issue is that, we are emotional beings, and we're watching news or reading newspapers, and our way of thinking and behaving is always guided by whatever tagline that we're exposed to and what our kind of a social environment, what our friends are talking about and so forth. And that is what's guiding our decisions, whether somebody's guilty, not guilty. It's kind of how we feel. But, the importance in that process, because obviously how we feel, it can change from one moment to the other. And when you deal with law, you want to have a certain, you want to have a continuity. And that's why it's important that there are very specific guidelines as to whether an individual should be a criminal versus not a criminal, because if it's just based on how we feel at the moment, then that law would not be very just.
That's true. So criminal justice, you're right. Criminal justice is more built on quantitative and inflexible laws, whereas social justice is a very primitive way of controlling societies. It can deal with just shunning people. I mean, it can be take it out of the courts in just general society. If you don't conform with the narrative, and there is a narrative, there are overlapping fields of fire, so to speak, that prop up this narrative that vilify our founding, and if you are on the side of tradition, you can be shunned. I mean, if you're wearing, let's say, if you're wearing a Trump T-shirt, and you were in an altercation with somebody from BLM, and how's that going to affect the jury when the pictures show you with the Trump shirt on it? Because in the narrative, BLM is the victim, and Orange Man is evil, and everyone that supports his policies is evil. And so, if the jury is looking at these images, I mean, are they able to be objective? And is the prosecutor able to command the room to remind them of the importance of the objectivity, or has emotion blinded the jury to the point where they just can't hear anything but, they can't hear anything. They're just operating on emotion. They made up their mind in the court of public opinion before they ever entered the courtroom. And so it takes some intellectual discipline to be objective for all of us, but in particular, if you are brainwashed by this narrative. And that is really the concern that I have. And that's another reason I talk about nullification in my book. I don't know if we have time to get into that or not, but that is a right that the people have under the Ninth Amendment, albeit not expressly stated. It's one of the unenumerated rights. The Ninth Amendment is to the people, what the Tenth Amendment is to the states. And so if you are being tried for something, the jury has the authority to find you not guilty, even if the state makes its case. Let's say on a hate crime. So say you realize that hate crimes are not crimes, it's thought police, and they've charged you with battery and a hate crime. You could nullify on the hate crime and maybe still convict on the battery because you recognize this is not a correct right, not a correct law. It should never have been passed in the first place. It's prejudicial. It's subjective, and so the jury has the authority to do that. But judges don't want you to know that. Judges want you to believe that, well, if the state makes its elements of the crime called the corpus delicti, then you must find guilty. That's not true. There's a Supreme Court case where it says in matters of prosecution, the law is as much on trial as the defendant. And that's why we need to educate a population so they can discern, and they can, do the best to be objective and throw out law that is misapplied, or in this case, in hate crimes, it shouldn't be a law at all, because it's really just thought police. It's so subjectively enforced and lumped on. I mean, if a Chinese person comes up to you screaming in Mandarin, round eye, and beats you up, none of the witnesses probably are going to know what was said. Was that a hate crime, or is it only applied to English-speaking people? See what I mean? You should look at behavior. Behavior is what we should be addressing. Behavior, and not the thoughts behind it.
Yeah, and I know in your book also in regards to the jury nullification, you mentioned the scenario where you had a two individual that burned down a meth lab or something like that, and they were not. They were let go. They were freed. The jury recognized that the meth lab or the whatever that was, it had changed the neighborhood, and it created an environment that was unsafe for all the children and all the people in that neighborhood. And these people had taken upon themselves to correct that and to create then a safe environment for their children. And then the jury had then decided that this was, this was not something that they should be thrown in jail for.
Right. The jury used their moral agency, and they nullified what they weighed as a noble cause crime. Now, and the jury does have the power to do it. As I say, judges don't want you to know that. Now, the downside of nullification, of course, and we were told our country is made for virtuous, educated people. And if you have what they call Bronx juries, where you have this attitude of stitches for snitches and that sort of thing, you can, like the O.J. Simpson trial, or Rodney King trial, or one of these kind of high-profile cases where the evidence is there, but they're trying to make more of a political statement. So that's a two-sided coin. You have the appropriate use, I would argue, of nullification, which the example you just talked about with the arson, and then you have the other side of the coin. But in a free society, there are risks, and so sometimes you're going to get someone who unfortunately gets off when they shouldn't, because whoever made up the jury in that area is making a political statement, and so the murderer gets off. But I'd rather that happen, as tragic as that is, than forcing people into prison, right, and taking away the power of the juror, because the juror is the judge also, in fact. And if we're a system of by and for the people, then how can an actual judge in a black robe take away the jury's power to also be judge? If it's a misdemeanor, it's 6 jurors. If it's a felony, it's 12 jurors, and it just takes one to nullify. It's a big responsibility to be on the jury, and I think that the power should be with the people, even though there is a risk that sometimes someone's going to get off that shouldn't. Again, where there's freedom, there's risks.
Yeah. And so what is then, why is the Constitution then so important in regards to all of this? What makes it so that we want to make sure that we really understand it and we have that as our measuring stick with everything that we do?
Well, thank you. Like Judge Scalia said, the Constitution says what it says and means what it means. It's not a living document, as the left would have you believe. It is the fixed standard. Anyway, ruling is a measurement. Or the Constitution is the employee handbook of the federal government or the state government, and it's important that it be understood and it be used as the measuring stick. Otherwise, people will, they get power hungry, and if they're not challenged by someone who understands their oath to the Constitution, the people lose. And in the United States, liberty must win, and in order for liberty to win, the Constitution needs to matter. The Constitution only matters if the oath matters. The oath only matters if people are elected and installed in office that have a reverence for our history, a love of liberty, an understanding of the Constitution as a living document, and the integrity to uphold their oath and the courage to interpose.
Yeah, and before we close, and we didn't get into Marxism much, but we've alluded to it and how it's infiltrating our educational system, and also how it's dividing us as American people, and it's having a strategy of divide and conquer. So from your understanding, from all the education that you've done, and from the people that have experienced it firsthand that you've interacted with, what is the objective of Marxism?
Well, transfer of power. In the final stage, it's brutal force. Up until that stage, it's to create such chaos and division that it can amass power, and such chaos that the people will scream for the iron fist of centralized government. And so Marxism ultimately leads to communism. That's the goal. Karl Marx, whose real name was Moses Mordecai Levi, he wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848, and the goal of that is the evolution to communism. So that's the goal. The strategy is what's always been to divide. It used to be, the means of production versus the workers, and now they divide it between race and sex and sexual orientation and religion, and any other way they can divide it. Have these balkanized sections of the country, fighting with each other, and and then come in and fill the power vacuum. The war on police is a big part of that too, to demoralize police, to make them so ineffective that the public will scream for a national police force. And that all these things, all this chaos and the war on cops, it's all designed to overturn the system and replace it with Marxism, which again evolves into communism. It's very, very dangerous. It can be a seductive sales pitch to young people in high school and college, but it is a lie that works. People like to point to certain countries and it works over there. Well, that's not; those aren't examples of. You look to the Soviet Union, look to Venezuela, look to North Korea, look to Cuba, look to Vietnam. Where communism really is in full, force. It is no place that you would want to live. It is not the utopia. Equality is a prison, right? It really is. Equality. It sounds, that's not equality. Well, they redefine the language. Equality means equality of results to them. They want to issue everyone the same, size apartment and the same pot and pan, and they want to control you, and they're not going to do it by competing in the free market of ideas. They're going to do it also by force, by vilifying tradition, and then creating a vacuum and assuming power. Our Constitution, it stands in the way if it's going to mean something, and again, that goes back to the oath. Yeah,
and kind of looking at Marxism and communism, then, which is what follows. Looking at Stalin's reign and during the 1930s, where he, in your book, you're mentioning that, he stated control the food and you control the people. And we, in light of what's going on between Russia and Ukraine right now, you're talking about the Ukrainian Holocaust and what took place during that time, starting in 1929, and the impact. And if we allow, those type of ideologies, we're moving towards that kind of that type of a government and the impact it would have on us as Americans, but all over the world.
Absolutely. And one thing I tell people, and they don't always realize this, is we lost World War II. By that I mean, yes, we beat the evil of Nazi Germany, but we lost to a greater evil, the Soviet Union. After World War II, the world was carved up to the benefit of the communists. People hear of Kristallnacht, and we should all know about that, but we don't hear about the Soviet communist mass murder of 300,000 Christian priests and nuns, and the destruction of over 60,000 Christian churches in the Soviet Union. I mean, the Soviet Union was a far, far greater evil. Patton wanted to rearm the Germans and go to Moscow and kill communism in its crib, and he didn't do it, but he was right. And so we are sort of duped through establishment history books to believe that we won World War II. That's not the whole story. We wouldn't have all these communist countries I've cited and others had we truly won World War II. There were really two enemies. One was, we were told, was an ally. No, not at all. The Soviet Union was a greater evil, and they should have been taken out too.
Yeah, and considering what they did in Ukraine at that time, starving 7 million Ukrainians to death, by restricting their food and taking their food, and that's kind of that's what collectivization really looks like when you have somebody that is taking away the power from the from the true minority, which is the individual.
Exactly, and in Ukraine, you're referring to the Holodomur, which literally means death by forced starvation, and it's people don't know this history, and you have to ask why. Well, the communists don't want you to know, what you need to know to see what's going on around us. And so when I point out some of the things I point out in my book, then I'm called various names, whether I'm talking about the demographics, Victor Offender demographics, or I'm talking about the origins of the Soviet Union. There is a real knee-jerk reaction by people who are publicly educated, and also a very sort of violent reaction by people who know what I'm saying is true because they don't want it to become common knowledge. Because knowledge, right, will cause us to see through their plans, and hopefully liberty would win. So I'm attacked by by the left, and I'm attacked by the ignorant. The ignorance is not insult; it just means lack of knowledge. There's things I'm ignorant on. I couldn't talk to you about medicine, but I could talk to you about policing, and I could talk to you about the effect of Marxism on law enforcement. So there's certain areas that we all have knowledge in, but as I say, they don't want the citizen to have the education that they need to restore the republic. And so that's why I wrote that book, and I want to educate citizens. I don't want us to devolve into a Marxist state, a police state. I love our founding. I think God gave us favor in the beginning, and I hope we still have it. But we have to do our part as individuals, and that's why I'm stepping up to the plate to run for sure. If I'm semi-retired, I could stay home and have my 2-hour workouts and watch reruns of 1 Adam 12, or I can do something. So I'm putting it all on the line, May 17th, and if it works out, great. I'll do my best to serve, just like I tell people I will, oath-centered.
I love it. Well, Doug, it's been such an honor to have you on the show, and it's a pleasure to see somebody fighting for our rights and willing to stick their neck out, even if it is. I mean, obviously, anytime you stick your neck out, it's uncomfortable, and somebody's gonna want to chop on it. But I appreciate you doing that and fighting for us. So thank you so much, Doug, for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Dr. Karlfeldt. I appreciate it.
Thanks. That is it for today. You're listening to Health Made Radio. Remember, check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. Make it. Make it. Make it. Make it. Make it.